Welcome to Blueprint for Life, the podcast designed to encourage, uplift, and challenge you on your journey. In just a moment, we will be joined by our host, Elder Lawrence McCarter Jr. We are thrilled you are willing to join us on this transformational ride. At Blueprint for Life, we believe each of us has a unique blueprint crafted by God Himself. This podcast will explore how to discover and unlock that blueprint, allowing you to live a life of purpose, fulfillment, and joy. Through insightful conversations, thought-provoking interviews, and biblical truths, we will delve into the keys that can unlock your potential. Together, we will navigate the challenges, setbacks, and triumphs that come our way, always relying on the timeless wisdom found in God's Word.
What's up? It is another week, and I'm feeling pretty good. This is, I think, episode 5. Man, 5 down. And I'm starting to get into the groove here. At least I think I am. You guys will have to be the ones to tell me whether I am or not. It's a hard thing to say when you're the one who's trying to decide if you're in the groove and also the one that's doing the recording. If you're a listener, tell me if you think I'm hitting the groove or not. Tell me what you think. But I think I'm starting to hit the groove. You guys be the judge. But I'm enjoying myself, having a good time, getting some thoughts off my chest, sharing how I feel, and I believe sharing what I believe God has given me to share, giving out this blueprint for life that I've come across in my few years on this earth, and trying to do so in love. I think there's enough people out there who are pointing fingers and nitpicking and trying to, force people to think a certain way about who God is and, what their perception of God is, when I think that it's so important for us to just remember that primarily God is love. And if you really want to get down to the basics of who God is and who He would have us to be, we have to remember that He is love. And yeah, there's definitely room for the conversation about His wrath. There's definitely room for the conversation about His judgment. But the initial conversation has to be surrounded by His love, because everything that He has done for us, His creation, has been surrounded by, inundated by His love for us as His creation, His love for us as the created beings that He made us to be. I don't think you can have the conversation about who He would have us to be without having the conversation about His love. Yeah, that's why I'm doing this. That's why I am so adamant about having the deeper conversation about what I believe is God's blueprint for our lives, because I think more often than is acknowledged, more often than we really like to talk about it, that conversation about love gets lost in the sauce. And we spend so much time talking about who's going to hell and why they're going to hell. And don't get me wrong, those are valuable, viable conversations. But we've spent so much time talking about who and why is going to hell that we've stopped talking about God's love, the reason why He has done what He has done, the reason why He made us to begin with, the reason why He established things the way that He did, the reason why He sent His Son to die on Calvary's cross for us. He didn't do that because He had a set of rules that He wanted to establish, or this was a box that He wanted to check off. No, He did these things because He loved us. If we're going to have this conversation, if we're going to have a full conversation about who God is and what His plans are for our lives, we have got to talk about His love. That's why I do what I do. And I think that is an important part of why we should continue to talk about this blueprint for life. Because the blueprint, you can't have the blueprint without the love. You feel me? Today, when we're doing this fifth episode of Blueprint for Life, I want to talk about the hardest thing you'll ever do. Okay? The hardest thing you'll ever do. Now, we do hard things every day. Okay? I think sometimes I complain, and in my complaints, I think that the hardest thing I'll ever do is get out of bed from an alarm clock. Or in some cases, I think the hardest thing I ever have to do is set my alarm clock the night before, because I am not a morning person. I really don't like alarm clocks. I feel like they are the enemy. They are the one thing that I think was designed to break up the peacefulness of sleep. I think sleep is one of those things that we were truly blessed to have, and it's what we take for granted as children, because when we're kids, we don't want to go to sleep at all. We try to avoid going to sleep. Our parents tell us that it's bedtime, and we look for all the excuses to stay up. But then when we become adults and we realize that we're going to have to stay up, and we're going to lose more and more of that precious sleep for all manner of reasons, whether it is working a job that's going to keep us on the job for an inordinate amount of time, or we have kids and our kids are now fighting sleep and it's forcing us to stay awake. And then when they wake up all extra early as if they have nothing else to do, and it forces us to wake up early after they've kept us up all night, lose out on sleep that way. Sleep, it's a valuable commodity, and once it's lost, it can't be gotten back. But I've grown accustomed to the fact that I will not be getting the kind of sleep that I like. But my old enemy, the alarm clock, he and I, we've not seen eye to eye for many a year, and I'm hoping that one day I can fully retire him and tell him to kick rocks with no shoes on and leave me alone. But anyway, that is definitely not the hardest thing that you'll ever have to do. Not even having to tell your kid no is the hardest thing that you'll ever have to do. No, unfortunately, telling your child no and then watching them melt down and cry and fuss and complain and whine and all of those things, it's not the hardest thing that you'll ever have to do. No, unfortunately, that is not the case. No, the hardest thing that you will ever have to do is forgive. That is truly the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. I have found over the course of my life that forgiveness is definitely the hardest thing you'll ever do. Both seeking forgiveness and giving forgiveness are the hardest things you'll ever have to do. It is one of those things that is incredibly difficult, both the seeking and the giving. Seeking forgiveness is hard because, let's be honest, as humans, as people, we can be incredibly egocentric sometimes, to the point of imagining ourselves as being in the wrong is something that I think the vast majority of us have turned like our blind eyes toward. Okay, like the ability to see ourselves as having been wrong is something that many of us we just refuse to see. All right, I was talking to someone once, and I simply said that all I want from you is for you to just acknowledge that you were wrong and we can move forward. And their response to me was that they were just like, I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong in this. You're just going to have to get used to the fact that I'm not wrong. And I looked at this individual as if like they had grown a second head, because are we looking at the exact same scenario here? Have we been living in two different worlds? Have I fallen into the Twilight Zone or something? How is it that we're living in the same space, in the same world, and we're seeing two totally different scenarios play out in front of us, that I can see where you're wrong, but you can't see where you're wrong? Like, how is this possible? But again, humans, we're fallen, sinful creatures, and this is what we have come to, where it is Satan's greatest desire to blind us to what it is that we are, to who we are, so that we cannot function the way God designed us to. Even down to what seems like the smallest of things, our interpersonal relationships, so that we can't even perceive when we have wronged someone or hurt someone. So we can't even admit when we're wrong. And it's just, look, I'm not going to ask for forgiveness. Why do I need to ask you for forgiveness? I didn't do anything to you. So then, on the one hand, the understanding that we need to ask for forgiveness, that's been knocked off. And then the other side of it is giving forgiveness, because it's okay. I've been hurt. I've been damaged. And in order for me to feel better, I need you to make this right. But because of the damage that I have sustained, you can't necessarily make this right, because I'm not going to rationally ask you for what it's going to take to make this, especially when it's an emotional hurt. You can't put a dollar amount on an emotional pain. If you don't believe me, sit down and watch an episode of Judge Judy or something like that, where an individual is putting a dollar amount on pain and suffering. I have never in my life seen anyone put a small amount on what they consider pain and suffering. If they're going to sue somebody, that amount for pain and suffering generally tends to be larger than the amount for which they're suing for the physical damage. Yeah, I'm suing $1,500 for the damage to my car and $2,500 for pain and suffering. The heck did they do? Like, what happened to your car that caused you pain and suffering in the amount of $2,500? Did they knock your soul from your body? What happened? And I find myself, and I don't watch them very often, probably because my emotional state can't handle it, because I find myself asking those types of questions and nobody can answer me. There's no one there who can provide me the answer that I'm looking for, because I'm legitimately wondering, like, where did this dollar amount come from? But we find ourselves in that pursuit of forgiveness, but we want to establish that in giving this forgiveness, you're going to have to jump through these particular hoops. But see, I find myself going back to when Peter was asking Jesus about this very subject. And just for reference sake, you can find this in Matthew 18th chapter, about the 21st verse, Peter goes to Jesus and he says, "Then Peter came to him and said, 'Lord, how many times could my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times?'" But what gets me is Jesus' response to him goes all outside of the expected norm. Jesus' response is, "I tell you, not as many as 7," Jesus said to him, "but 70 times 7. This idea that forgiveness is somehow limited is a very human idea, a very human construct, because in our humanity, the idea is that, look, I'm only going to put myself out there so many times, and I'm only going to allow you to hurt me so many times. I'm only going to forgive. Look, you can only cross me so many times and I forgive you. I'm only going to wipe this away so many times before I write you off and push you away and have nothing more to do with you. And that's that. And Peter puts out there this idea of, look, 7 times, that's all I'm willing to do. But then Jesus' response is, no. How about, instead of saying 7 times, how about we look at the option of 70 times 7? And for those of you who are not math whizzes, and I am not, I had to do my math on this myself. I had to whip out the handy dandy calculator myself just to make sure I had the right number. But for those of you who are trying to keep up with this, 70 times 7 is 490. Now, if you think about it, we don't typically, or you wouldn't think you would typically have any single individual wrong you over 400 times a day. So what Jesus is basically saying is, it doesn't matter how many times someone wrongs you, forgive them. Now, I don't think that Jesus was saying to be foolish and just let somebody run over you and just continue to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. No, be wise. Don't just put yourself out there and let somebody continue to do the same thing over and over again. If somebody scams you once and then they try to run the same scam on you a second time, no, open your eyes, be wise, pay attention. Don't allow them to do the same thing to you over again that they've done before. But be willing to forgive. Because, see, the blessing in forgiveness goes so far beyond it being just for you. Because what we have to understand is that our forgiveness is not just for us. It's also about, or it's not just for the other individual, it's also for freeing ourselves. Because can you imagine how many shackles we hang around our neck on other people's behalf by not forgiving? Think about it. For everything that you hold on to against someone else, that's a shackle. So for every time that someone has done something against you and you've held on to it, that's a shackle that you've held on to against someone. Something else that you have to remember. Another scar on your psyche and on your heart that you're holding on to in order not to be harmed or damaged in that way. And every time you hang on to those things, and every time you allow these shackles to remain wrapped around your heart, it makes it that much more difficult for you to trust and to love the next person. And it makes it that much more difficult for you to develop a solid friendship and a solid love with the next person. And before long, you become so untrusting and so difficult to deal with that even people who would have your best interest at heart will refuse to attach themselves to you because you've become so wrapped in the chains that they can't get to you. You're so wrapped up in the hard exterior of these chains and shackles that the softness of who you once were is no longer accessible. So I'm asking you to do the hardest thing you'll ever do, and that's to forgive. Not for the sake of the other individual, but for your sake. Because see, if you continue to read the parable that's listed there in the 18th chapter of Matthew, from the 21st verse down, you find that there was the slave who had found himself in a great deal of debt, and the master was quite angry with him. And when he was going through his books, he found the debt that this man was into him, and he went to him and told him, hey, pay it back. And he said he couldn't. So the man was going to take and put him, his wife, and his children, and he was going to sell all of them into slavery and his stuff so that he could pay back this debt. But the man got down on his face and begged this man not to do it because he didn't know how he was going to be able to pay this debt back. And the man was like, you know what? I'm going to have a heart and I'll forgive you. And after he had been forgiven, this cat went out and found somebody who owed him just a little something. And he grabbed this cat by the throat and went all in on him and was like, pay me what you owe me. And this guy was like, man, look, I don't have it. Look, just be patient with me. I'll get it, but I don't have it right now. But this guy who had just been forgiven was unwilling to forgive. And he threw him in prison until he could pay it back. But see, this guy's friends, they were aware of what had just happened. So they went back to the man who had forgiven him and told him what had happened. So he summoned the guy back and went off on him and told him, look, you wicked. I forgave you all of that debt just because you begged me to. So shouldn't you have also had mercy on your fellow slave? But since you wouldn't have mercy, I'm going to hand you over to the jailers. And he did. And they tortured him until he could pay what he owed. Look, forgiveness is powerful. Husbands, if your wife did something today, yesterday, last year, whatever, stop holding that stuff, man. Wives, same thing. Stop holding that stuff. Let it go. Forgive one another. Ladies, if somebody has done something in your life and you still holding on to it, fellas, somebody has done something, let it go. Families, look, let it go. We got families who have been torn apart. Folk can't even go to family reunions because of something somebody did during grandma's generation. And the grandkids are still paying for it because they don't know who their cousins are. Why? Because the cousins got beef with each other for something don't nobody even talk about no more. Let it go. Y'all forgive. Let this stuff go so that God can cleanse this stuff from our hearts and forgive us for the things that we, because I promise you that what we've done is far worse in His sight. The things that we do on a daily basis is far worse than the little piddly stuff that we trying to hold over each other's head. Let it go. Do the hardest thing you'll ever do and forgive one another so that God can do the same for you.
Hey there, fellow listeners. As we wind down another inspiring episode of Blueprint for Life, we want to thank you for tuning in. Remember, you can always find more uplifting content and past episodes on our website, blueprintforlifepodcast.com, or you can find us on Amazon Music, Audible, or Spotify. Join us next time for more faith-filled conversations and stories that fuel your spirit. Until then, stay blessed and keep shining your light.